Well, hello again. Welcome to round two of the plagiarism controversy, and I'll show you what we've done. Let's see. I'll share the screen right now, and we'll make myself small, make that look big. And if you want to see what we've done, you can go into the week of Hydroplate Week of Celebration. Go down there, and we took a look at round one was setting the record straight, where we looked at the first letters and the response. Then we took a look at the timeline. We took a look at the summary. And this is going to be round two. So I'll show you what we did for round two. Let's see here. We're going to go up into rsr.org, and search executive summary. And then you're going to see this thing by Pastor Kevin Lee. And we're going to skip through the highlights and skip through his letter and get down to the very first letters that were written, and you can read them for yourself. This was June 18th, a letter from Brown to Austin. June 18th, a letter from Brown to Morris, and a letter from Austin, their response, Austin to Morris, and then also Morris to Brown. And then this was the July 6, 1993, letter from Brown to Austin and Morris, setting the record straight. And if you recall, this was a rather lengthy one. I think it was 14 pages. And then what we're going to build on is their response to this setting the record straight. So you can go into hydroplate.org. Let's see, hydroplate.org. And you can go into Hydroplate Resources, down to Hydroplate Controversy. And up here, it says Hydroplate Documents. And so we're going to take a look. This one, I think it is. Yeah. Dr. Brown's response. We did this first one already in round one. And so we're going to do the response to his attempt to cover the plagiarism. Okay. And this is going to be Austin's exchange. And this is going to be Monday, September 20th, 1993. Okay. Dr. Brown's response to Austin's attempt to cover his plagiarism. Okay. And this is Austin reproduced below is Dr. Steve Austin's entire letter responding to my report, Grand Lake and Breach Dam theories, setting the record straight. His words are indented 1/2 inch from the left margin. My interspersed responses begin at the left margin. Austin's letter dated July 11th was delivered to my address on August 16th. So this is Dr. Walt Brown replying on September 20th, and I also amended it in November 9th, but this is the letter that Steve Austin. So Austin says, this letter is a short response to your 13-page manuscript, some issuing concerning the breach dam theory, which is dated July 6th, 1993. I'm not interested in establishing who has priority. Okay, let me make sure you guys can see this. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, and then Dr. Brown says, you claimed priority in your letter on June 21st, 1993. You wrote that the 1988 guide book, whose text was written in November 1987, contains clear language describing the theory of a breach dam. These publications would appear to prove that I was the first creationist to propose the breach dam theory of the origin of the Grand Canyon. It would appear that I preceded you by 2 years on recognition of the lake in southeast Utah. My conclusions preceded yours by 2 years. Austin's emphasis. Are you retracting such a claim? Dr. Austin, he goes on. What concerns me are your allegations that I borrowed improperly or did not give credit correctly to your work or Ed Holroyd's work. So Dr. Brown replies, my allegations are much broader. You have made false charges against me, claiming that I took some of your material on the Grand Canyon. People will testify they heard you make these accusations. Number 2, you have taken without permission artwork and other matters from many researchers. You then copyrighted it as belonging to ICR. In a phone conversation with me on June 30th, 1993, you admitted that you did not get copyright releases from them. By addressing only improper borrowing and crediting from Holroyd and me, you are drawing attention away from this larger pattern of admitted copyright infringement. Your letter of response ignores all this. Austin goes on. The first statement appears on page 3 of your manuscript, concerns my publication of the computer-generated lake map, but my not crediting Holroyd as the source. Holroyd gave Austin permission to publish Holroyd's map, but asked to be referenced. Austin did not credit Holroyd in this 1989 guidebook, page 3 of Brown's July 6 manuscript. The second statement is more significant and appears on page 7 and concerns my use of the elevation of 5,700 feet. 5,700 feet, excuse me, in association with the computer-generated map of the lakes.
Wireless color.
Okay. The second statement is more significant and appears on page 7 and concerns my use of the elevation of 5,700 feet in association with the computer-generated map of the lakes. Since it is not one of that someone else would likely conclude, it seems probable that Austin got that number from me. This means that he probably heard my explanation sometimes after I began talking publicly about it September 16th, 1988. But before his letter to Holroyd on January 23, 1989, map publishers usually indicate some intentional errors in their maps. In that way, if anyone copies the map, they will copy the error. Courts have used this to show plagiarism. The elevation I have always used for Grand Lake, 5,700 feet, was such a trademark, page 7 of Dr. Brown's July 6 manuscript. A telephone call to Ed Holroyd today quickly determined our understanding of the truth on this matter. Both statements or suppositions of your July 6 manuscript we maintain are false. Okay, to which Dr. Brown replies, please let Holroyd speak for himself and avoid hearsay. I have recently talked to Holroyd and do not believe he will describe matters as you have. I also have a letter from him, which I quoted in the report and note 15. His letter differs from your claims. And Austin goes on. Ed told me today that he remembers the telephone conversation as I do. When it came to the issue of publication of the map, we discussed on the telephone the problem that Ed might have. The computer used the government terrain database, and acknowledgement of Ed as the source could cause problems on his job. It might be claimed by someone that this was unauthorized governmental use. Therefore, both Ed and I agreed that the first publication of the map in the 1989 guidebook would be a redrafted copy and would not acknowledge Ed as the source. Ed told me that he remembers not wanting to be cited as the source on the map's first publication because Ed was the source, and wanting to give credit to Ed that I thought was required. I checked by phone with him the next year. He agreed to be acknowledged on reprint versions of the map as the source. Later versions give him credit. Brown adds, not really. You only said parenthetically, plotted by Edward W. Holroyd III. That could apply to graphic artist or anyone giving you clerical help. The reader would never suspect that Holroyd proposed the lake idea to you and gave you the original map. Also, in your 1989 videotape, Mount St. Helens, you used his map and never credited him or mentioned his name. Even in your June 21st, 1993 letter to me, you tried to take credit for being the first creationist to propose the breach dam theory of the origin of Grand Canyon. You continued to hide Holroyd's contribution and seek credit for yourselves by saying, who was the first creationist to propose that a large post-flood lake existed in southeast Utah? I was working with Dr. Ed Holroyd, Arvada, Colorado, to do the terrain analysis, which led to the plotting of the lake shown in illustration on page 54 of the 1989 Grand Canyon Guidebook, published in February of 1989. As best as I can remember, this plotting was done in 1987. It would appear that I preceded you by 2 years on recognition of the lake in southeast Utah. You claim that, unquote, he's quoting from Austin. Walt Brown goes on, you claimed you hid Holroyd's contribution so that his employer would not learn of his work on this project. However, that is no reason for you to minimize or conceal his contribution in our correspondence and conversations unless you were trying to take credit for his work. Holroyd explained the problem with his employer in our first conversation on June 25th. Austin goes on, during our telephone conversation before first publication of the map, Ed and I discussed how we could make the redrafted map different than his Kodak photograph made from the computer running the government database. We recognize that stating that the lake was plotted at elevation 5,577 feet on the redraft version would tie it to Ed as the source. We both agree to add a rounded off error and make the redraft map designate a different elevation. This was actually quite proper because the government database does not have elevations as accurate as 5,577 feet to assist the computer in plotting the location of lake's shore. There is error in plotting the shore location. The computer has to interpolate. Therefore, I rounded off the elevation to 2 significant figures. Brown responds, no, you didn't. You had rounded off. Had you rounded off the elevation to 2 significant figures, your published number would have been 5,600 feet. Why didn't you settle for 5,600 feet, since the further you got from Holroyd's best estimate of the lake's elevation, 5,577 feet, the more inaccurate your map became. The rounded number Holroyd used when he first published his idea in 1987 was 5,600 feet. See the report, bottom of page 4. Furthermore, that accuracy could be important if you or anyone else ever searched for shorelines. I know because I made such a search in 1988 and found some amazing things that might have otherwise been missed. In your letter to Holroyd just days before you published the 5,700 number, you referred to the lake as being at the 1,700 meter level. See end note in 15 in the report. If you both were concerned about fuzzying up the 1,700 meter number, why did your letter not reflect that? It is very doubtful that Holroyd's supervisor would see and read your ICR Grand Canyon tour guide. You told me it was just an internal document for ICR, which would make it even more unlikely. Even if Holroyd's supervisor saw your guidebook, would he recognize that 5,577 feet is 1,700 meters, or that 5,600 feet is almost 1,700 meters? Probably not. The former supervisor had seen the map. The former supervisor had seen the map. Wouldn't he be more likely to associate other obvious characteristics of the map with Holroyd? Why then distort the lake's elevation? If the risk to Holroyd was so great, why would you publish the map at all, especially when you had to be so devious? Why would you go to so much trouble just to add one technical detail in an addition? Obviously, you had a strong desire to print the map in an ICR publication as soon as possible. In this case, it was in a backdated edition published in 1989 with a 1988 copyright. In our initial phone conversation and your first letter, you emphasized the misleading 1988 copyright date as the basis for establishing your priority. Okay, unquote. Austin goes on, thus 1,700 meters, 5,577 feet, divided by 0.30, the 2-place conversion factor for transforming meters to feet, gives 5,667 feet, which is rounded to 5,700 feet. Brown responds, I find it strange that you have now changed your story about how you arrived at 5,700 feet. In our phone conversation on June 21st, I asked you how you arrived at 5,700 feet, and you said that the saddle in southern Utah had an elevation of 5,700 feet. After reading my report, you now know that is not true. Now you have come up with another story, one that raises many more questions than it answers. How, after almost 5 years, can you remember the conversion factor, approximately 0.30 for 0.3048, you used to convert meters to feet? Most people cannot remember for 1 week the numerical approximations they use. On June 21st, you either were mistaken about or could not recall the general methodology you used. For simplicity, most people use and most conversion tables give conversion factors requiring multiplication, not division. That's because multiplications are easier. Using a 2-digit multiplicative conversion factor would give you 5,440 feet. Rounding it would give you 5,400 or 5,000 feet. When one approximates some constant such as 0.3048, one hardly ever throws away the digits closer to 5, 50, etc. You throw away 48. This is why no book approximates pi 3.14159 as 3.1 or 3.141. Instead, 3.14 is most commonly used. Austin goes on. The map does not give the lake's elevation as 5,700 feet, only the height of the dam. Austin's emphasis. Brown responds, after all this contorted effort to justify how you arrived at 5,700 feet, you end by saying that you were not talking about the lake's level anyway. You were referring only to the height of the dam. This gives you two arguments which you don't explicitly state. One, Brown spoke and wrote about a 5,700-foot lake. Austin wrote about a 5,700-foot dam. Therefore, Austin did not copy Brown. Two, Austin wrote about a 5,700-foot dam. The lake could have been lower, such as its true elevation, 5,577 feet. Both arguments have inconsistencies. The dam's height has little significance. If the dam's height was 5,700 feet, then you gave very little information about the lake's elevation, volume, and position. An alert reader wants especially to know where the lake was. It is the lake's position, especially its shoreline, that the theory's originator must announce, and the other researchers must know to test the theory against the geological evidence on the ground. Furthermore, in your video, Mount St. Helens, 1989, you refer twice in quick succession to the enormous lake that could have existed behind the Kaibab Plateau. You gave its elevation as 5,700 feet. You obviously were not speaking of the Kaibab Plateau, which is 1,400 feet higher. No, you have clearly associated 5,700 feet with Grand Lake's elevation. In our phone conversation on June 21st, you specifically referred to the lake's level drawn at the 5,700-foot elevation. In your January 23rd, 1989 letter to Holroyd, you wrote, the lake level shown is the 1,700-meter level. There is no doubt that your elevations all refer to the lake's elevation, not the dam's. Although the number 5,700 may seem like a trivial detail, you can't escape the serious implications of your using it, unquote. Austin goes on, Ed does not feel that using the new number is improper. He wondered why you are so concerned about it. Brown responds, again, much of what you are writing in the last few paragraphs is hearsay. What you say, Holroyd says. When you talked to Holroyd, he had not seen the report and was unaware of the background. My recent conversation with him is at variance with what you are saying. Regardless of what he will say for the record, we should not characterize or try to influence him. We should both be able to question him if his testimony is ever required. Unquote. Austin goes on, now you have it, the truth on how the elevation of 5,700 feet got associated with the lake map. We also have here an example showing that I have been careful to offer credit and honor and wishes of the source. Do you still presume that I have used 5,700 feet on my redraft map, that I took your ideas from your public lecture? Brown responds, yes. Also, I was willing to let some independent group study everything, ask us questions, and decide. I was confident that if you had to answer direct questions in the presence of others, the truth would come out. However, you ignored my offer of Christian arbitration. Austin goes on, I deny specifically your allegation that I heard you talk publicly before January 23rd, 1989 about the 5,700-foot elevation of Grand Lake and, without your permission or credit, included it on the redrafted lake map printed in February of 1989. Brown responds, that may be true. However, what is at issue is quite different. Did you reach your majority conclusion on Grand Lake and the formation of the Grand Canyon independent of me? Austin goes on, The chronology you list on page 2 of your July 6 manuscript does not include 4 important dates. 1. Dr. Austin makes field observations of the Chattahoochee Formation in eastern Arizona and is in agreement with early geologists who have proposed Hopi Lake. Observations made in late August 1979. Brown responds, Hopi Lake was discovered and named long before you or I ever thought about it. The date when you agreed with someone else's discovery is of no consequence. Austin goes on. Number 2, Dr. Austin begins slide illustrated public lectures associating the breach dam at Mount St. Helens with Grand Canyon. Lectures start in September of 1983. Thousands of people hear this lecture by 1985. Brown responds, do you have a tape recording of any of your lectures before September 16th, 1988, in which you describe how the Grand Canyon formed? ICR has an enormous repository of tapes of your past presentations. It should be easy for you to locate one if your claim is correct. I made a similar request for such documentation in my letter on June 18th. So far, nothing. Austin goes on. After ICR graduate student submits research report including discussions of Chattahoochee Formation, Dr. Austin sketches by hand the probable shore location of Hopi Lake above 6,000 feet. Sketch map is not dated, but probably made in the fall of 1985. Brown responds, Hopi Lake was never an issue. Its past existence has been known for a long time. Austin goes on. Number 4, face-to-face meeting between Dr. Austin and Dr. Holroyd in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with discussion of catastrophic drainage models for formation of Grand Canyon, including lake or lakes east of Grand Canyon. Meeting was in August 1986. Brown responds, Holroyd wrote us on October 12, 1993, that this discussion occurred in August of 1990 when he presented a paper on the subject. Austin, put these 4 events into your chronology on page 2 of your July 6 manuscript, then read it again. The last event, the August 1986 meeting in Pittsburgh, has special significance to your statement that in December 1986, Holroyd informally proposed to Austin that a giant lake may have existed east and north of the Grand Canyon, page 2 of your July 6 manuscript, and could qualify your statement. Austin is taking credit for Holroyd's original work, page 8 of your July 6 manuscript. Brown replies, ... could qualify my statement. No, my prior statement stands without qualification. Austin goes on. Ed has made very valuable contributions to creationist understanding of Grand Canyon and the Colorado Plateau. I acknowledge them. I give him credit. I want to encourage Ed, and because of our good relationship, I want to assist him and possibly co-author with him in the future. A person like Ed Holroyd would make a valuable addition to the ICR staff. Brown replies, whether you work with Holroyd in the future or add him to ICR staff is irrelevant to this issue. I note that you sent a copy of this letter to Holroyd. In my opinion, your remarks are a transparent attempt to gain Holroyd's gratitude and enlist his help through compliments and hints of possible employment. This is called buttering up. It is highly unethical and in fact a crime to try to influence legal testimony by threats or bribes. While we are not in court and desire for truth and fair play applies to both. While we are not in court, the desire for truth and fair play applies to both situations. Holroyd recently inquired about a job at ICR. Therefore, you and ICR have leverage over him, and you used it. You used it in a clumsy, unprofessional way, both as a threat, no employment, and as a bribe, a possible job. What surprises me is not that you did it, but that you put it in writing. Austin goes on. I have answered the critical matters which relate to your allegations that I borrowed improperly or did not give credit correctly to your work or Ed's work. Brown replies, You have not addressed most of the critical issues. Please reread my last paragraph on page 1 of this letter. Austin goes on. It seems reasonable to conclude that Ed Holroyd and I were working on the breach dam explanation for Grand Canyon independent of you before August 1989. There's no plagiarism here. Your conclusions did not borrow without credit from ours. I request that this letter not be cited in revisions of your circulating manuscript. The matter of Ed's involvement with the terrain database should remain confidential. Let's respect Ed's wishes on this matter. Brown replies, I am unaware of such a request by Holroyd. He published his map and ideas in 1990, at note 12 of this report. So he is not, as you imply, trying to hide his map or ideas. He also is working on a related paper and is considering retirement soon. He no longer works under the difficult supervisor. Your request sounds like an effort to bury this whole matter. And then Austin signs off, sincerely in Christ, Stephen A. Austin, Chairman, Geology Department. CC'd to Ed Holroyd, Henry Morris, and Emmett Williams. Brown responds, researchers are currently entertaining hypotheses and looking for evidence to explain poorly understood observations. Scientists sometimes even publish their supposings. One classic example is the belief that a ninth planet existed beyond Neptune. Its discovery would account for the apparent and unexpected orbital perturbations of Uranus. The search went on for years with Clyde Tombaugh until Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto. Now let's compare this with the breach dam idea and what I suspect happened from your end. You were supposing that a lake, Hopi Lake, might have breached the Kaibab upwarp to form the Grand Canyon. One reason you never publicly announced this is because you lacked a mechanism. You had no reasonable or convincing scenario by which Hopi Lake could breach the 1,400 foot higher, 30-mile thick Kaibab upwarp. There were dozens of other questions that a sophisticated audience would ask, which you could not answer. Without these answers, you and ICR would have been severely ridiculed for making such a proposal. However, your supposings could be put in an ICR guidebook, which would be seen primarily by a lay audience. Then you heard of parts of my explanation. I was, in the opinion of you and others at ICR, unqualified to work in geology, but parts of what I was saying and writing made sense. You felt scooped. Others at ICR looked to you to have the geological answers. This could be embarrassing. You had to work fast, stop supposing, and be more definite. You remembered Holroyd's map. You preferred not to mention his name, report and note 15, and thereby appeared to be the author of the explanation. By quickly adding to the map to the 1988 guidebook, you could make your claim to the breach dam theory. It would appear to have been made in 1988 or earlier, even though it was added in 1989. Then in August 1989, you bought the 5th edition of In the Beginning weeks after it was printed. You read my explanation for the Grand Canyon. You then knew you had to be even more specific about what happened to form the Grand Canyon, so you made major revisions in the 1990 guidebook. Unfortunately, you used the name Grand Lake, its elevation of 5,700 feet, and a very similar map to mine. However, as the years passed and you heard nothing from me, the feeling that you came up with the explanation grew in your mind. You even told stories that I had taken some of your material on the Grand Canyon. Many, especially at ICR, associated the Grand Lake explanation with you. On June 18, 1993, my letter arrived, letting go of your authorship, acknowledging what you received from Holroyd, and specifically submitting to my questions and those of an arbitrator would be very embarrassing. Therefore, you dug in your heels. The rest is well documented by our letters. The many details fit neatly into this scenario. Those who thought and wrote that there was a ninth planet never claimed credit for the discovery of Pluto. Science doesn't work that way. Instead, credit went to Clyde Tombaugh, a former professor of mine, who many thought was unqualified to participate in the search. Science is interesting, isn't it? We both have other things we should be doing. This has gone on too long. All I ask is that you honestly acknowledge what you have done and correct matters. Walter T. Brown. So there you have it. Let's see what we got here. Brown to Morris. We did, okay. Let's see how we're doing on the timeline. We've been going for half an hour. Let's see. Yeah, we'll continue. Let's see what happens. Well, that's the response. That's round 2. We're going to end this one. Well, let's move this. Okay, that's round 2. We'll end this one and pick up at the next letters. It's pretty interesting to see how they're going back and forth. And again, we're just doing this so science can advance. We want a theory that's making accurate predictions to be brought into the mainstream. And there's a whole bunch of resistance to it. And I think it's because of this situation. So we're bringing this to light. It can be dealt with, and then science can progress. And so if you want, I suggest people to start asking about the hydroplate, and also to start, asking about accurate predictions in the future. What predictions does your theory make? And then compare it to the hydroplate. And so anyhow, thank you for joining in for round 2. We will start round 3 shortly. And so I hope you're as interested in this as I am. It is fascinating to see a theory that has been around for 50 years. 53 years. He came up with it in 1972. And it's so frustrating to see a theory that's been making accurate predictions kicked to the curb by evolutionists, which makes sense, and creationists too, which doesn't make sense. So hopefully we can get this into the mainstream. Thanks again for watching, and we shall see you in a bit. Have a blessed day.